What if I told you that this life that you're living right now is heaven? That you were born into heaven. You don't die and go to heaven. You are born into heaven. Would you believe me? The reason why I say this life is heaven, and many of you will agree with me, is that we've kind of learned how to manipulate or discover how to work our lives to make it work for us. Many of you here already know my story, but just for those of you who don't, I'm just going to give you a synopsis of it. 2006, February the 2nd, was supposed to be my last day here on Earth. I had stage 4 lymphoma, and on that day, I had slipped into a coma. At that point in my life, I had cancer. I had had lymphoma for 4 years. And by that point, the cancer had spread, the lymphoma had spread, starting from my neck. I had tumors, some of them the size of lemons, and they had spread from all around my neck, down under my arms, to my breasts, all the way down to my abdomen. I had fluid in my lungs, so every time I would lie flat, I would choke on my own fluid. I was breathing with the aid of an oxygen. Excuse me. I couldn't breathe without the oxygen tank. My muscles had completely deteriorated, so I couldn't walk. I was either lying down or in a wheelchair. I weighed about 85 pounds. I looked like a walking skeleton if I walked, but most of the time I was in bed lying down, but if I lied flat, I would choke on my own fluid. I had these great big open skin lesions where liquid was coming out of these big open skin lesions. And basically, I was at the very final stages of my life. And on February the 2nd, 2006, I went into a coma, and the doctors told my family that my organs had now shut down and that I was not going to be coming out of the coma, and these were my final hours. They said I wasn't even going to make it through the night. But during that time when I was in the coma, I was actually aware of not only what was going on in the room around me, but I was aware of what was going on beyond, not just beyond the walls. I was aware of what the doctors were saying outside my room, down the corridor, what they were telling my husband and my family. But I was aware even beyond that. I became aware of my father, who had passed away 10 years prior, and my best friend. But most importantly, I felt amazing. I felt incredible. I felt like I was loved unconditionally, like never before. It was an unconditional love that words cannot even describe it. It was like I didn't have to do anything to be worthy of being loved. I was worthy and deserving just because I existed. I didn't have to prove myself. And for the first time, I felt well. I felt healed. I felt incredible. During that experience, I had a choice of whether to come back into my physical body or not. And at first I didn't want to come back because it was so incredible on that side. And who would want to come back into a sick and dying body? But I then entered into what I would call a state of incredible clarity, where I understood why I had the cancer. I understood how incredibly powerful and amazing in fact, every single one of us actually is, and we don't realize it when we are in our physical bodies. I understood how every choice and every decision I had made in my entire life had led me to being on that hospital bed in that moment in time, dying. And I realized in that moment that knowing what I know now, if I chose to go back into my body, I would heal very, very quickly. And it was in that moment that I felt my Father saying to me, now that you know the truth of who you really are, go back and live your life fearlessly. And it was in that moment that I started to come out of the coma, completely surprising my family members and the doctors. My tumors shrunk by about 70% within 4 days after coming out of the coma, and the doctors couldn't explain it. As the tumors continued to shrink, the doctors continued to take tests to figure out what was going on. And they couldn't figure it out. They did biopsies and they did scans, and within 5 weeks, all the cancer was gone. They could not find any trace of cancer in my body, and they could not explain it. And the skin lesions healed by themselves as well. The doctors had said I would need surgery for the skin lesions, but they healed all by themselves. And as I built up my strength to get stronger so I could walk again, at the end of 5 weeks, they let me go home completely cancer-free. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. One of the things that I learned in that state of clarity of what I believe what I believe actually healed me from cancer is I learned that the most important thing that I can do is to love myself unconditionally. Love myself as though my life depends on it, because it does. When I was in that state, the love I felt was a kind of love I had never felt before. And I realized that in my entire life, I had never loved myself. I had always forsaken myself, beaten myself up, made myself small. I'd always been a people pleaser. I'd always worried what other people thought of me. I'd always been afraid to express who I truly am. I'd never loved myself. And I would say that learning that lesson was the biggest lesson I learned. I remember that when I was lying in that hospital bed, days after I had that near-death experience in that state of clarity, just within 4 or 5 days after coming out of the coma, I was just starting to learn to walk. I hadn't been able to walk because I hadn't walked for months because my muscles had deteriorated. But now my strength was coming back. And the nurse helped me to get out of bed for the first time in months. And I got out of bed, and she helped me to stumble across the hospital room. And she took me in to the bathroom, to the mirror, so that I could look at myself. It was what I wanted to do because I hadn't looked in a mirror. And I remember looking at myself, and I was shocked at what I saw, because I weighed about 85 pounds, and my cheeks were completely sunk. They were sunk in so far that it looked like my teeth were jutting out, and my eyes looked too big for my face. And my hair had come out in clumps, so there were all these bald patches. And I had all these wounds on my neck, which were the open skin lesions. My neck was all bandaged up. And I looked at myself, and I started crying. And I cried not out of vanity of what I looked like. I cried because I could not believe I had done this to myself. I looked at myself, and I looked straight into my own eyes in the mirror. And I said to myself, I promise you, I will never do this to you again. I will never forsake you. I will never let you down. I will never let other people walk all over you ever again. And when I say that I told myself that I would not do this to myself again. For anyone who has or has had cancer, I'm not saying that you deserved it or it was your fault or you caused it. But in that moment, I realized that I had never loved myself. I had never put myself first. I had always put myself last. I had always criticized myself. And what I have learned, as I mentioned earlier, what if this is heaven? What I learned is that how much we love ourselves, how much we realize we are worthy and deserving, that is what determines how much of heaven we experience here in this physical life. And that is so important. That is the most important thing. Yet none of us are taught this. None of us are taught this as children. And yet that is the one thing that we all need to know, is how important it is to love yourself and to know how worthy and deserving you are. Everything that is good comes into your life, or how much of it comes into your life, is dependent on how worthy and deserving you believe you are, including the kind of partners and relationships, including the amount of abundance. And yet we're never taught this. And you know what's really interesting? Is that when you stumble upon this truth, it's very difficult to put into practice self-love because people judge you for it. So many people believe that it's selfish. So many kids are still taught that. Most of us were taught that. We only learned to love ourselves after growing up and attending Hay House conferences and reading books like mine and others. But as kids, you weren't taught this. And then you go and you try to share this with the world, and people tell you that you're delusional. The last time somebody told me I was delusional, I almost fell off my unicorn. That's why nowadays I only hang with people who indulge my delusions. Now, when I talk to you about self-love, many people believe that self-love means allowing yourself a treat, allowing yourself to eat chocolates. Of course, that's really important. And going for a massage, getting your hair done, doing a manicure, whatever, going out with the boys for a beer. All that is great. All that is really important. But I want you to take it one step further than that. Loving yourself also means being your own best friend. It means being there for yourself, no matter what. Absolutely no matter what. It means that even if you've lost everything, even if, for example, let's say if you're a budding author or something, or even a musician or an artist, imagine if you completely bomb and get bad reviews. Even if everybody else is criticizing you, even if your business fails, it means being able to still look at yourself in the mirror and saying to yourself, even though everyone else thinks I stink, I still love me. I'm not going to give up on me. I'm still there for me. That's what it means to love yourself. That's what it really means. To tell yourself, I'm still there for me. I'm going to pick myself up, dust myself down, and try again. Most of us are afraid of failing. We fear criticism. We fear disappointing other people. And this is what prevents us from being who we are. This is what prevents us from writing that song or writing that book or sharing ourselves with the world or expressing ourselves to the world. But actually, we think we're afraid of being criticized by other people or letting other people down or disappointing other people. in actuality, what we're afraid of is disappointing ourselves. Because what happens is when other people start to criticize us and other people start to become disappointed in us, we start to worry as to whether we're really not good enough, and so we start to become disappointed in ourselves. But when you make a commitment to yourself, when you actually make a commitment that you're going to be there for yourself no matter what, then you stop being afraid of sharing your truth with the world, sharing your art, your music, yourself, your soul, because that is your purpose for being here. Many people believe that positive thinking is really important, that it's our thoughts that create our reality. I'm not denying that it's our thoughts that create our reality, and so it's better to have positive thoughts and so on. But there's one element that goes deeper than that. It's actually our thoughts and emotions about ourselves that create our reality. And what sometimes happens is that when we believe really strongly that our thoughts create our reality without knowing the full story, we start to become afraid of our thoughts. And we start to suppress the thoughts that we think are negative because we're afraid that these thoughts are going to create a negative reality. And when you start to suppress certain aspects of yourself, what you are doing is you're sending yourself the message that, okay, this part of me is wrong, this part of me is not good, I have to deny it. We start denying parts of ourselves. What I say is, allow yourself to feel what you're feeling. Allow yourself to think what you're thinking. As long as you love yourself, value yourself, and not deny who you are, that is far more important than actually suppressing your negative thoughts. In other words, it is much more important to be yourself than it is to be positive. Because when you allow yourself to be yourself, when you are positive, it is a genuine positivity. It's a real positivity. And also, being yourself is not about denying. Loving yourself is not about denying aspects of yourself that you don't like. For example, also, a lot of people believe that loving yourself means constantly denying certain aspects and saying, no, I'm beautiful, I'm wonderful, or whatever, even when you're not feeling certain things. I can do this, even when you're not feeling you can do it. It's actually not about talking yourself up or being in denial about certain truths about yourself. Loving yourself means loving yourself even if you fail, even if you're not good at something, even if you fall flat on yourself, on your face. So in other words, it means that even if you do have a problem or an issue in certain areas of your life, even if you are bad at relationships or at certain habits, or you have a bad habit, it's not about being in denial about those things. It's about saying, yes, it is an issue, but I love myself anyway. And do you know that if you love yourself, you're more likely to work through those issues, whether they're addiction issues, relationship issues. When you love yourself, you're more likely to work through them with love and compassion than if you hated yourself. Because how much time and energy are you willing to invest in someone you hate? So no matter how many problems or issues you have, the first thing to do is to love yourself in order to work through it. And the more you love yourself, the more you'll be able to create that state of heaven right here and right now. So on that note, I'd like to leave you with this message of love yourself like your life depends on it, because it does. Thank you very much, New York. Thank you.